I'd like ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record a fake tweet sparked panic at Eli Lilly and may have cost Twitter millions. I have it right.
Without objection.
Thank you. And thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. I actually thought that Republicans were supposed to be proponents of the free market. But now I see I was mistaken because the majority of this committee appears intent on having independent companies run ads on their favorite conservative media platforms. And I hate to break it to my colleagues across the aisle, but companies' decisions not to advertise on conservative platforms, as we've heard today, is because they're concerned about being associated with the content on those platforms, and that content can hurt your brand and your revenue. And that's not an antitrust violation. That's the free market doing its work. It's also not an antitrust violation for these companies to be members of the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. They're not forced to do that. GARM is an organization that, as Professor Waller notes in his written testimony, does not appear to function as a trade association or even a traditional standard-setting body. Professor Waller also notes that GARM's members, for the most part, don't compete with each other. Rather, GARM's members are freely associating, a First Amendment right. It is explicitly protected by the First Amendment. So the majority and Mr. Shapiro allege that GARM is helping advertisers collude in violation of our competition laws. And I quote Mr. Shapiro, "prevent anyone from disseminating information they don't pre-approve." However, GARM's members lack this kind of power. They're not gatekeepers for online information. And even if they did have this power, the revenue Mr. Shapiro's own company and popularity of his podcasts undermine this argument. However, even if there was collusion, which there is not, that could be protected by the First Amendment, by the right to association and the right to speak or not to speak. Isn't that right, Professor Waller? Because the Sherman Act was never intended to restrain First Amendment expressive actions like group boycotts. Is that correct?
Yes. The First Amendment in antitrust operates more as a shield rather than a sword. And companies are allowed to work together or individually to seek governmental action, to persuade the public on matters that are of concern to them.
And Professor Waller, even if it made sense to characterize GARM's conduct as a boycott, would that make any difference under the law?
No, you would have the same issues that we've talked about. There would have to be an agreement. There would be you'd have to have some substantial harm to competition, and in general, you would have to have a lack of a legitimate business justification.
Okay, so, and the courts have been consistent about this. Is there any kind of big split in the circuit, big controversy over this?
Not that I'm aware of. Over the last 60 years, there was a time where if you called something a boycott, it would be treated as per se. And over time, the courts have just backed off and said, we really, unless it's part of like enforcing a cartel, it's really a case-by-case basis where you balance the harm against the justifications involved.
And the situation with GARM and that's going on with advertising wouldn't even come close to meeting these antitrust standards?
In terms of the publicly available information, what I've heard today, no.
Okay. Thank you.